happy Tuesday afternoon. I hope everyone's doing well, and it's raining here in Atlanta. So if you're in Atlanta, stay dry. Thank you for joining this podcast. We are going to be talking today about what the election means to your money. Now, I am not about taking sides, so don't think that this is a webinar about one side or the other or trying to convince you on who to vote for. The great thing about this country is we can vote for whoever we want, but I want you to be informed and educated to be able to make decisions depending on who wins the election here in a few weeks. So we're going to go through this presentation. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and I'll try to answer them at the end. And we will talk about different stocks and investments that you might want to take a look at. So here at Oxygen Financial, we call ourselves private CFOs, and some of you on here might be clients of mine. You might be clients of other of the private CFOs at Oxygen, and you might be watching this we're recording it, so you might be watching it in the replay and not a client at all. So what we really want to try to do here is teach you how to take care of yourself. So even if you are meeting with me, I want you to be able to take away something that you can say, hey, I'm able to do this myself, even if I can't meet with BAM. We know the elections bring uncertainty, and this is probably one of the most controversial elections we've had in a long time. They all seem to be crazy, but this one is really out there. And so we're going to talk about how to approach this uncertainty of the election. Let's start with things that we still don't know. Likelihoods, things that are probably going to happen, but due to the current pandemic and the coronavirus, we still are not 100%. So the first one is working from home. Will it have permanency to it? Will it become a permanent thing? We know that a lot of companies have told their employees to work from home, and the question is going to be, is that going to stick? And when we have a vaccine, or things are a little bit better from the virus standpoint, are we going to go back to the office life that we had? That's still an unknown. We have been doing tons of home projects. I tell you right now, I've got a massive home project going on in my backyard. I'm trying to level the hill in the backyard. And that's mainly because we're not traveling, we're not going out, we're not eating out, we have extra money. What happens once we are able to travel again? Will those home improvement projects stop? Shifting from an urban environment to a rural environment. Now, from a residential housing perspective, this is really not being affected. Residential real estate is still on fire, and that's mainly because there is a short supply of homes available for purchase, and so that is causing the market, even during a pandemic, to continue to be pretty hot. But we're not 100% sure what's going to happen with the commercial side, the compression of businesses saying we don't want or need as much commercial space across America. And online shopping and home delivery, how are they going to affect restaurants and retail after the virus is done? That's still a big unknown. We know that right now online shopping is hot and doing very well. We know that home delivery, a lot of the restaurants that are not taking people into their restaurant are basically partnering up with DoorDash and Uber Eats and those type of delivery services, or creating their own. But no matter what are things that are universally going to happen regardless of how long this pandemic lasts? The first one is telemedicine. It was growing before the pandemic. It was already something that was slowly starting to take hold, and the pandemic just accelerated that. So If that is something you think as well, you might want to look at an ETF called Global Telemedicine and Digital Health. The symbol is EDOC. That would basically have a lot of that telemedicine type of investment in it. Something that I have in my portfolios, my clients' portfolios, is an ETF called the Next Gen Connectivity. It basically deals with, the internet getting faster, piping that faster speed to everyone. We know that that's become even more prevalent between all the streaming services that we have for our entertainment, and now with the kids still at home. A lot of them are not going back to school. They're doing virtual learning. And so I think that is going to continue. Regardless of what happens with the virus, you're still going to have a lot of people streaming entertainment, and we're going to need faster and faster pipeline. And FIVG is a good area for that connectivity. Green energy, clean energy, any of that, electric cars, AI, autonomous driving, all of that is definitely going to continue. It's a universal inevitability that that's going to happen. It was happening before the pandemic. So that's a good place to look at adding some of your portfolio, and even more on the connected house, the automation. So not just the autonomous driving, but anything that's VR or AI, um, even augmented reality is getting pretty hot. And the Autonomous Technology and Robotics ETF, ARKQ, is something that I have in all my clients, almost all my clients' portfolios. Now, let's get into some specifics about the different presidents and possible presidents and what we should be looking at. So stocks, and I'm not, just as a full disclosure, I'm not recommending any individual stocks here. I'm just sort of giving you a feel for the types of areas using individual stocks that you could look at. It doesn't have to be these individual stocks. Frankly, I'm not a big individual stock guy. I like exchange traded funds more than individual stocks. And you know but I do throw in some individual stocks into my portfolios. If Biden wins, I think something like a Brookfield Energy Partners would be a good option. This is not your traditional energy play with oil and whatnot. They're more of a renewable energy player. Three-quarters of their company's funds come from hydroelectric facilities, and they also own some solar and wind operations. And currently, they're in the process of trying to acquire a company called Terraform, which would give them even a bigger market share in the wind and solar area. So, if Biden wins, he's definitely a big green, the new Green Deal type thing. So, Brookfield would definitely be one you would want to look at. Vulcan Materials. So, one of Biden's campaign promises was to spend a bunch of money on infrastructure, like $1.3 trillion over a decade. Be very cautious, whether it's Vulcan or any other of the infrastructure type investments. Be very careful with them because, yes, he wants to do that, but really, I've heard this story over and over every 4 years from every president: infrastructure, infrastructure. And at the end of the day, they can never figure out how to pay for all that infrastructure. Does it need to happen? Yes. But remember, we're spending a lot of money right now on just keeping the economy going. It's going to be very difficult for Biden to do infrastructure unless he gets, a left side, a liberal side Congress to help him spend that money. But this company Vulcan ranks as one of the largest producer of construction material. So any of those roads and bridge projects and highway projects, they would be involved with. Another Biden stock you want to look at is Tesla. That goes back to that same thing I said a second ago, the Green New Deal of Biden. Tesla is all about the autonomous vehicles and the battery powered vehicles rather than the um, oil and gas consuming vehicles. So this would be a good play, even though the price is pretty high. Tesla has finally shown a quarter or two of profit, and I think they're on that right track. Charter Communications. So, oops, I'm sorry about that. Charter Communications is basically a good one if Biden wins because they've already announced, Charter's announced that they really are interested in that rural digital opportunity fund that the government's creating, where they're trying to get the internet to more rural areas, bridge that digital divide. And I think if Biden wins, this would quickly advance a company like Charter Communications. So now let's turn to if Trump wins the election, stocks to own under a Trump presidency. The first one I would look at is Amazon. So we know that Jeff Bezos and Trump don't get along. You've probably seen news articles of them arguing. Bezos owns the Washington Post, so he has used his media platform to be critical of Trump. And Trump has basically talked about how he wants the U.S. Postal Service to double the rates of Amazon. But even though he has made those kind of comments, his administration for the last couple of years has not done anything to back that up, and I just think it's a real long shot that the U.S. Postal Service would be used to attack a company like Amazon. So I think he'll do well. We've seen an increase in the amount of online shopping, and Amazon is poised to take advantage of all that. Another one is Caterpillar. you know, uh, Donald Trump said, we're going to make Caterpillar great again. I can't do a Donald Trump impression. Sorry. Maybe I should call up Alec Baldwin and see if he can come do an impersonation for us. But regardless, Caterpillar has done well over the last 4 years during Trump's presidency. It's up over 50%. And that's mainly because his campaign 4 years ago was all about building the wall, and naturally some of that rhetoric has gone away because of the pandemic. But if he wins again, I think you're going to start hearing that again about building the wall, and that's going to benefit companies like Caterpillar that are in the construction business, and they've got all that equipment that you would need to build a wall. So Caterpillar would definitely do well under a second term. Um, Here's one that is a little controversial, and I'm hesitant to even talk about this. And some people may not know what this is, but the Geo Group basically is all about the for-profit privatization of prisons, and they're technically a real estate company that owns the land of where all these prisons are, and so it's really a real estate play, but it's a controversial one because they're dealing with prisons and various types of detention centers, which we know Trump has been, you know, a little critical of trying to put people in detention centers. We're not going to talk about the social side of that, but this company, despite the ugliness associated with it, since Trump claims to be the law and order president, would do very well. Wall Street, I think, will reward this company with a higher stock price because of a Trump win. And another one is Twitter. So we know how much the Donald loves Twitter, and frankly, I don't think Twitter likes the Donald very much because they have definitely been, they flagged many of his tweets as being untrue or unpopular, and he complains that the platform is silencing conservative voices and things like that. but the reality is Twitter needs Donald Trump as much as Donald Trump needs Twitter. And here's why: because prior to 2016, Twitter was really sort of in that bottom third of the social media platforms. They really were not doing well. They, were losing out to the Facebooks and others of the world. And, you know, President Trump and all his controversy has made them relevant again. So if he wins, he's going to continue to tweet, and if he does, that will be good for the Twitter stock price. So that's something I would look at if Trump wins. Let's turn for a second now from stocks to taxes. So I'm not going to talk about Trump's taxes because we've seen the things he's done over the last 4 years with taxes. There was that big tax act a few years ago that made it a little bit easier to do your tax return. They increased the standard deduction. It helped some people, it didn't help other people. But I want to talk about, since we don't know a lot about Biden's tax plan, make sure that you are fully informed on it. Now, we know, what we do know is that he wants to heavily tax wealthier people. And you can agree with that or disagree with that. I don't have a personal opinion. But one of the ways he's going to do that is through the Social Security tax. So right now that does get capped, but it will be in perpetuity for those people over 400K, which is not something we've had before. He also wants to increase capital gains on wealthy people, people that make over $1 million. I had someone once say, "Oh, this is never going to affect me because, I don't make over $1 million." Right now, capital gains tax is at 20%. He wants to bump it almost to 40%. And those of you on the webinar right now, or if you're watching the replay of this and you're a business owner, this could dramatically affect you. At some point, most business owners want to retire and sell their businesses. And a lot of times those businesses are worth more than $1 million. So you would absolutely, if you had $1 million business that you sold, be paying $400,000 of that to the government. That is a huge amount of money for something that you worked decades building and crafting, and now the government just wants to take it. So I'm not a huge fan of increasing capital gains, but I do respect the fact that this is only going to be on people over $1 million. So most of us watching this today are definitely not going to be affected by that. He wants to increase corporate tax rates. You can debate that all day long, 21% to 28%. I believe more corporate tax rates stifles the corporations from going out and doing more things and innovating. But, that is a way, if you're trying to raise money, to raise some money for the government. He wants to eliminate the Section 199A deductions if you're making over 400K. Again, most of you on this webinar, you may not be affected by that if you're not making more than 400K, so you don't have to worry about that. Here's one, though, that you could have to worry about. He wants to cap itemized deductions at 28% and remove all the SALT tax. The SALT is, if you're not familiar with that, is the state and local tax. So, capping that at 28% is going to limit how much deductions you can take. Now, there are a lot, I've met more and more people and talked with more and more of my clients as we look at their tax return since the Tax Act, the Trump Tax Act, where we have a larger standard deduction. And because of the larger standard deduction, some people, middle class people, are finding that they can get a bigger deduction from the standard than taking itemized. And the only thing I want to mention about that is, if that is the case with you, then my next statement to you is, then that means your mortgage is no longer a tax advantage. And you really should be reaching out to your private CFO or your financial planner and talking about, should we be getting rid of our home mortgage because we're not saving any money if we're taking the standard deduction. Here's a big one that I think is going to affect a ton of people, and most people don't understand this and don't get it. So he wants to completely eliminate the step up in cost basis. So let me explain if you're not familiar with what this is. So any non-retirement asset that you have, your home, your car, you buy a stock, personal possessions, you paid a certain amount for it. And when you sell it, if you sell it for a gain, you pay a capital gain. We already said right now it's 20%. When you die, your heir gets a step up in the basis. That means if you paid $100,000 for a home and it's now worth $400,000 and you pass away, your heir gets a step up. Your basis is now 400,000. They can sell that house the next day and pay no capital gains tax. All right. He wants to eliminate that. So think about that. We have a huge number of baby boomers that are starting to age into their 60s and 70s. We still have a number of the silent generation, that's the 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds out there. And both those demographics have a lot of wealth that will be transferring when they pass away. And so if you have a grandmother or a parent who is in that situation and they've lived in their house, they paid $100,000 for their house, they've lived in it for 30 years, it's now worth $400,000, and there's no step up in basis. When you inherit that house and try to sell it, you're going to have a $300,000 capital gain. And at 20%, that's $60,000 the government's going to take away from you. So that, I think, is going to affect a lot of middle Americans who are in that scenario where they're about to inherit money from their family members and they're going to get whacked with a big tax. And the last one on his plan is the elimination of 1031 exchanges. Doesn't affect a lot of people, but any of you that are landlords and you might have a rental property, and what a 1031 exchange does is it allows you to sell a piece of property and exchange it to a like kind piece of property without incurring a taxable event. It's basically like moving from one brokerage account to another brokerage account. You don't actually incur any taxes when you do the exchange. And there are rules around how those exchanges happen, but he wants to eliminate that. So if you have a rental property and you want to sell it and buy another rental property, that whole transaction is going to be taxable. So I want to talk a second about some things you can do to protect yourself. Over the years, some of the things that we've recommended at Oxygen have been investments that have some downside protection to them. Some of these investments started in the annuity field where you could invest in an index and they have, say, a 10% downside protection. A couple of years ago, an exchange traded fund came up with the same concept where you could invest in an index, say the S&P 500, and if you held that investment for a certain period of time, like 1 year, they would cover the first, say, 10%. Now, the way they did that was they would put a cap on the upside. So maybe here today, we get to October 1st here in a couple of days, and they come out with one and it says over the next 12 months, we're going to give you a 10% downside protection, but we're going to have a 13% cap. If the S&P 500 goes up more than 13%, you're only going to make 13%. But if it goes down, they cover your losses for the first 10%. So that was one way to protect yourself. But I want to talk to you a second about something we came up with recently, revolving around what we calling a barrier note. All right. So you have to ask yourself this question. Today, worst case scenario, how far do you think the S&P 500 could go down over the next 12 months? So if you're thinking and using your, hey, what was the market going to do over the next 12 months, which is almost impossible to do you think it can go down 10% in the next 12 months or 15%? Whatever you think, you would pick, let's just for this example say 15%, that would be our barrier. That would be the protection up to 15% that we're going to be protected from over the next 12 months. And the way these barrier notes work is on the upside, you would have an absolute return of an amount that would be disclosed when you purchase this. And even you would get that return even if the market was down in value above your barrier. So let me explain that. Let's say today we buy one of these with a 15% barrier, the market and it and the absolute return, just to make it simple, is 10%. The market goes down 14% over the next 12 months. We would still have an absolute return of 10%. But here's the risk part of it. The risk is if that barrier is broken at the end of the term and it went down 16% or 17%, we eat all the downside. All right. So if this is something that's of interest to you, give me a call. If you're working with one of the other Oxygen Financial private CFOs, give your private CFO a call and we can do a special meeting around how these work in more details. I'd bring on one of our specialists to talk about because they are priced daily, and so that absolute return would would be different depending on what day you actually purchased and what your barrier you're picking is. So I've had a number of questions since the pandemic started about what to do with short-term cash. Hey, I've got this cash. I was supposed to use it for a vacation or whatever. I've just built up cash because we're not spending money eating out. What do I do with the short-term cash? Where do I put it? And we've created a cash management system that you don't have to wait until the election is done to pick those stocks. We can put something together to manage that cash. And we designed it for the short term so that we don't have to worry about, hey, I need to buy this stock and hold it for a long period of time to see its growth. We've uh, built this around some of the biggest institutions. And what we're trying to do is target a 2 to 3% net rate of return. And we'll do that over the next 12 months. So we're not trying to hit home runs with the cash management program. We're not trying to make 20% on our money. What we're trying to do is keep pace with inflation. Inflation's been, hovering a little over 2% for a while. It could go up even more in the next couple of months. And we want to make sure that if we have $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 sitting in our local bank doing nothing, it's at least put to work to earn that 2 to 3%. It is completely liquid, this program, and we have no penalties for access to the money. So if you say, hey, I need the money 2 months later, we just pull it out. So talk to your private CFO about our cash management program. Now, you can know a couple of things from this webinar as well as about me. First is that all the private CFOs, myself included, are constantly watching all of this stuff every single day. If you want, we have some great resources on our Oxygen Financial website. Just go to oxygenfinancial.com. And while you're there, if you want, you can enter your email address and sign up we have a market commentary that our founder puts out. We have a Sunday email paper that comes out where we each write blog articles about various topics going on. I'm going to continue to do these client webinars. So I've got one coming up in a month or so about IRAs and retirement accounts. And you can just ask us anything you want. So those of you that are on here that are clients of mine, I want to thank you for working with me. I truly appreciate the ongoing referrals you've sent me. If you're not a client and you're interested in any of the things you've heard today, just reach out to me, give me a call or shoot me an email, and we can set up a little Zoom meeting to talk about your specific situation. So let me just check real quick. It does not look like we have any questions in the chat. So I appreciate y'all listening to me here for 20, 30 minutes. And y'all have a great rest of your day. And we'll see you soon on the next webinar.